Imagine with me, if you will, you are a 7-year-old. Girl, boy, it doesn't matter. Outside, it is an ideal spring day. The sun is shining, 70 degrees, not a cloud in the sky. Spring is in full swing. Flowers are blooming, bugs are coming out of the ground, the snow is melted, you can hear streams, wildlife, organisms of all kinds just out there waiting to be discovered and studied. Now, again, remember you're this 7-year-old, but this time you're in a classroom. You know what's going on outside. It's a gorgeous day. You want to be out there. But instead, you're in a classroom. You're antsy. You have been corrected for the 10th time to sit still, listen, and follow directions. And you have this looming parent phone call home just hanging over your head if you ask one more question without raising your hand. All you want to do is go outside and play, dig, get dirty, discover an adventure with your friends. But you can't. There are quotas that need to be met. There are standardized test scores that are needed to honestly get the proper funding for teachers to teach you. Your participation is vital sometimes for them to keep their jobs. Knowing all of this, how do you feel as that 7-year-old? Does this environment inspire you to learn? Do you feel like you can be creative? Do you feel comfortable enough in front of your friends and your peers and your teacher to raise your hand and ask questions that help you better understand this big wide world you're in? I personally wouldn't. I know my 4-year-old son, who is wild and rambunctious, he definitely wouldn't be really inspired in an environment like this. But the reality is, this environment is what a lot of our elementary school students are being faced with today. In a world where technology is up and screen time is also up, recess has kind of taken a back seat. In fact, a lot of schools are cutting the amount of time kids have at recess at all. This is negatively impacting the mental and physical health of our youth. It's also having the opposite effect of high test scores and satisfactory academic performance. In order for our kids to really exceed in the classroom and reach their full learning potential, recess has to be made a priority. Cutting recess in public schools shouldn't be an option at all. Now, let's talk about what recess is for a minute, okay? So, unlike physical education class and unlike after-school sports, recess is a time of unstructured play that occurs regularly during a school day. Now, the key words to focus on here are unstructured and play. According to Sergio Pellis, who is a researcher at the University of Lethbridge in Alberta, Canada, developmentally speaking, play is an essential part of childhood cognitive development. When a child plays, what happens is neurons at the very front of the brain begin to make different connections. The neurons change. If play isn't occurring, those neurons never actually change. So, why is this important? Well, if the neurons never change, the part of our brain that has everything to do with being able to effectively problem solve and process emotions and eventually make plans in the future, that part of our brain doesn't develop at all. So, how does all this work? Well, let me tell you. You're that same 7-year-old that we talked about in the beginning of this speech. You go outside with your friends at recess, and you and your peers decide, without the supervision of an adult, that you want to play a superhero game, okay? You want to come up with this new game idea, so you have to talk about it. What's the object of the game? What kind of characters are you going to have? Are there rules to this game? How do you win? Do you win at all, or is it just continually being able to play pretend? When you're having these interactions with your classmates and you're asking these questions, circuits are actually literally being created in your brain to help you solve these problems. So when kids aren't playing, what's happening is those neurons they're not connecting, they're not changing. These new, really cool circuits that are helping us solve problems, they're not being created. This is going to have a negative impact on our youth, but also that youth when they grow up. Problem solving will be down, processing emotions is going to be down, and being able to make plans, especially in the workplace, well, that's just not going to be happening as effectively. Now, in the United States, recess overall is considered important. Across the board, everybody's kind of on the same page. Recess is important. Kids should get a little bit of a break. They need it to be able to be good, functioning students. But what there isn't a set standard for is the amount of time kids have for recess. In any given United States public school classroom, elementary school classroom, there's about 20 to 60 minutes of recess per day. Now, in inner city schools, that amount of time is significantly less than in suburban schools. Is it a coincidence then that in urban schools, test scores, standardized test scores, are significantly lower than the scores of suburban schools? In a country that puts so much emphasis on standardized testing and funding for schools based on these standardized test scores, don't you think there should be some sort of a set time limit on how much recess kids should have and how much unstructured playtime they should have? Let's jump across the pond really quick. Let's look at Japan. Now, Japan is off the charts in terms of their scores, their elementary student scores in science, reading, mathematics. Their scores are also significantly higher than that of the United States. In Japanese elementary schools, kids get 15 minutes of recess every single hour. The reason being is because in Japan, they realize the overwhelming evidence that says in elementary school, kids' attention spans cap out at about 40 minutes. After 40 minutes, everything that they're hearing is going through one ear and right out the other. So they get these breaks every single hour. In Japan, these kids get 15 minutes every hour to recenter, to be able to kind of unwind, socialize, and be ready to come back into the classroom to retain the information they learn. So in the United States, kids are getting 20 to 60 minutes a day of recess, while in Japan, a student can get up to 120 minutes of recess per day. Now listen, I'm not saying that we go from 20 minutes to 120 minutes of recess overnight, but I am saying if the U.S. Board of Education put a higher standard on the length of time that kids are allowed to spend outside at recess, we would see improvements in our test scores, and we would see a positive overall change in public school morale. Now, in an elementary school in Fort Worth, Texas, this elementary school was one of the first U.S. schools to adopt this idea of more recess time. In this elementary school, kids get 2 15-minute breaks in the morning and 2 15-minute breaks in the afternoon. When they implemented this plan, they saw astounding results. Kindergartners and first graders, who a lot of people might think are generally off the walls, they were coming in from recess ready to listen, to pay attention, to follow lesson plans that their teachers made for them. Not only that, they were tattling on each other less. There was less bickering. They were starting to solve problems on their own. And that was directly after this new plan came into place. Now, the plan that was developed in Fort Worth, Texas, was by a woman by the name of Debbie Ray, who is a professor at Texas Christian University. And she developed this plan called Blink, which centers around longer recess time. And she developed this plan after she studied abroad in Finland in elementary schools. And she noticed that these schools in Finland were also giving their students 15 minutes an hour of recess. Now, Finland, just like Japan, as you may have guessed, sets a new standard for test scores and academic success. So if we implemented that plan here in the United States, those results would follow. The brain is fascinating. Our brains now, currently, a lot of us here today, our brains have reached their peak of development, okay? And pretty soon they're going to start deteriorating. The bulk of our development happens when we're young. Our brains actually spend more time deteriorating than they do developing. Because of that, it's essential that we're giving kids the tools that they need to be able to problem solve and reason and be able to process their emotions as well. If we want our workforce to be able to make plans, work as a team, really function together, we need to increase recess time for our kids now. If we want our child's prefrontal cortex to develop the way it should and help them become functioning, reasoning adults, we need to increase recess time. Our kids are kids. We need to allow them to be kids. Let them adventure, let them play, let them take the rest they deserve so that they can perform to the best of their ability in the classroom.